Good day, everybody. Welcome back to Rocky Mountain Readings, where last week we just started into a new book, The Golem and the Wondrous Deeds of the Maharal of Prague. And this is a unique story by Rabbi Yudl Rosenberg, written in 1909. And if you caught the first episode, you see how they give us fair warning that it most likely is a fictitious event based on historical figures. Like the Maharal was an actual great rabbi for sure, but the storyline, was that he supposedly bought these, long lost documents to tell some of these stories, but it was written is such a way that it's just grabs you right in, like some of these great Hollywood movies. And at the beginning of it told us about how many movies and plays that were done about this work in the past. And we might have heard of the Golem from J.R. Tolkien's series, The Lord of the Rings. But the story of the Golem goes way back in ancient Hebrew roots as a creature made out of clay, but brought to life by Kabbalistic means. And if you caught the end of last Thursday's class, we were reading about the introduction of some funky characters for sure, based on the false accusation of blood libel against the Jewish people that went on way back in those days. And blood libel was the accusation that the Hebrew people used to use the blood of a Christian child in their Passover. And so they would try to frame Jewish people. And so we see the introduction of the wicked priest Thaddeus in a court trial, making these false accusations. But King Rudolph, who is showing friendship to the Maharal, and also a sympathetic cardinal. And that's where we left it. It was just starting to get interesting into the book, into the read. And I think we're going to take off today with some really interesting parts of this story. So, let's just jump right in. And we were on chapter 7. We're about 21% into the book. And I think it's only going to get more and more intriguing for sure. So it starts off, the man who excels at his work shall attend upon kings. This is the Maharal, and this is what's going on in the storyline with this King Rudolph. So on the first day of the month of Shavat, King Rudolph sent a canopied carriage to the Maharal, accompanied by 2 high-ranking ministers, who gave him an entry pass into the king's palace. The Maharal rode with them to the king's citadel, where he was given a royal welcome. The king spent an entire hour conversing with him, but the Maharal did not reveal what they had discussed. Afterward, the Maharal was sent back home with equally great honor. He returned from his visit to the king happy and of good cheer. As for now, the Maharal declared, I was able to reduce our misfortune with the blood libel by more than half. But I have great confidence with the help of the Creator, blessed be He, I will succeed in nullifying this calamity completely. And if you recall, that's how the story started out, that the Maharal, his parents named him, was it Lowell? Meaning to bring them relief. And the reality was, he saw this in his days, though historically there's no records of blood libel cases against him in Prague in that era. But the story being that it did go on, and it was well known to the Jewish people, and they were always, the pogroms and things that pursued them out of communities all throughout Europe and whatnot. But anyways, you see how it escalated. So 10 days later, King Rudolph sent a decree to all the courts prohibiting outsiders from being accused in any trial involving the blood libel, except for the man clearly identified as having committed the murder. Moreover, at every blood libel trial, the rabbi of the city or the head of the Jewish community must be present. Furthermore, the judgment rendered by the court in a blood libel trial must be sent to the king for his approval. In other words, there was an appeals process put into place. Thereafter, the Jews were able to enjoy a bit of freedom, for the fear of the Maharal fell upon the Jewish baiters. But the plague of the blood libel had not quieted down completely, for if one of the common folk bore a hatred against a Jew, he schemed to lie in wait for him and cast a dead Christian boy into the Jew's domain and accused him of ritual murder. And how was it possible to exempt a Jew from punishment if he was subjected to this false accusation? The man the Maharal feared most was the priest Thaddeus, an anti-Semite and Jew baiter and sorcerer as well, in whose heart jealousy and hatred burned against the Maharal. The priest declared that he would wage a vigorous battle to have him exiled from Prague forever. Thereupon, the Maharal secretly revealed to his students, "This is why I fear the priest Thaddeus, for he possesses the spark of the Philistine Ishi Benob." Shalom, Ashley G. Well, I've written with me the sparks of King David, peace be upon him. As is well known, David was relentlessly pursued by the Philistines and was almost caught by him. That is why the Maharal decided to enhance his strength and make them firm as a mirror of cast metal, which would enable him to fight his adversary, the priest, with all his might. How the Maharal created the Golem. Wow, chapter 8. The Maharal asked a question during a dream, inquiring what power would enable him to fight his adversary, the priest. The answer came from heaven. You will create a golem made of clay, loam, and order him to destroy the evil tormentors of the Jews. The Maharal's reaction to this was that these words contain combinations of names through whose power one can always create a living golem from clay. He then secretly summoned me, his son-in-law, Yitzhak ben Shimshon HaKohen, and his illustrious student, Yaakov ben Chaim Sasson Halevi. And in the year 5340, or in the year 1580, on the 20th of Adar, at 4 hours after midnight, the three of us left for the Moldau River on the outskirts of Prague. By its banks, we looked for and found an area with loam and clay, from which we made the form of a man, 3 cubits long, lying on its back, and then shaped a face, arms, and legs. Then all three of us stood at the golem's feet, staring at his face. The Maharal told me first to walk around the golem 7 times, beginning on the right side, proceed to his head and circle around it to its legs on the left side. He told me what combinations of letters to recite as I walked around him, and thus I did 7 times. When I completed the circuits, the body of the golem reddened like a glowing coal. Now the Maharal ordered his student, Rabbi Yaakov Sasson, to complete the 7 circuits as well, and gave him other combinations of letters. When his circuits were done, the fire departed, for water had come into the body, and vapor began wafting from the golem. Then he grew hair like a man of 30, and nails formed at the tips of his fingers. After this, the Maharal began his 7 circuits. When he was done, all 3 of us had recited in unison the verse, "He breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living creature. For even the atmosphere we inhale must contain fire, water, and air, which are the 3 elements mentioned in the book of creation." Then the golem opened his eyes and gazed at us in wonder. Now the Maharal called to him in an insistent voice, "Stand on your feet." Suddenly the golem sprang up on his feet. Then we dressed him in the clothes we had brought with us, garb that was suitable for a shamash of the court. We also put shoes on him. In short, he looked like the rest of us. He saw, heard, and understood, but he did not have the capacity for speech. At 6 a.m, before the break of dawn, 4 men returned home. As we walked back, the Maharal told the golem, "Know that we created you out of the dust of the earth to guard the Jews from all harm and from all the ills and troubles they suffer at the hands of their enemies and oppressors. Your name will be Yosef. You will live with me, sleep in a room in my court, and serve as the shemesh of the court. No matter where I send you, you will obey each one of my commands, even enter into a blazing fire, immerse yourself in deep water, or leap from a tower until you complete the task I have given you." As he listened to the Maharal, the golem nodded like a man agreeing with his friend's remarks. I called the golem Yosef, the Maharal told us, because I drew into him the spirit of Yosef Sheda, who was mentioned in the Talmud, a creature half man and half demon, who also served the sages of the Talmud and saved them a number of times from great calamities. Even if the golem enters a blazing fire, the Maharal added, he will not be burned, nor will he drown in a river or be killed by sword. Regarding the golem, the Maharaj told members of his household, while on my way early this morning to the ritual bath, I met this poor mute on the street and marked that he was a great simpleton. I felt sorry for him and brought him home to help the Shemoshim of the court, but I forbid members of my household to use the golem for domestic purposes. And because the golem always sat in a corner of the courtroom at the edge of a table, resting his head on his hands, looking indeed like an unfinished vessel, lacking wisdom and understanding nothing, and not worrying about a thing under the sun, the people called him Yosel, the golem, while some named him Yosel, the mute. Chapter 9, how Yosel the golem carried water for Passover. But Perel, the Maharal's wife, peace upon her, could not resist making use of Yosel the golem a day before Passover Eve to help her with holiday preparations. Unbeknownst to the Maharal, she mentioned to the golem to fetch water and fill up the 2 large barrels that stood in a special room that had already been cleaned and made ready for Passover, and into which no one entered prior to the holiday. Yosel quickly seized the yoke and the 2 buckets and dashed off to the well to bring water, but no one was around to notice what he was up to as he brought in the water. In short, Yosel the golem did not have the faintest idea when to stop fetching water, because no one told him to stop. So he kept on bringing water and pouring it into the barrels, even though they were already full. The water now covered the floor up to the threshold. Then it began flowing to the other rooms. When members of the household noticed the water suddenly gushing on the floor of the house, they became frightened and astounded. Water, water, they began shouting. The Maharal, too, was frightened at their cries. They looked and searched, and when they opened the door where the 2 barrels stood, they finally discovered the source of the water. They saw Yosel the golem pouring the water. This prompted a great deal of laughter in the house, and the Maharal, too, began laughing. Look here, he told his wife, you found yourself some water carrier for Passover. He immediately ran to the golem, took the bucket from him, and said, enough, that's quite enough. The Maharal then brought him to the courtroom and sat him down in his place. From then on, the rabbi's wife was careful not to make use of the golem for her own needs. Because of that incident, a popular saying spread through Prague. When someone wanted to criticize a workman's shoddy labor, he would say, you're fit to be a watchmaker like Yosel the golem is fit for carrying water. How Yosel the golem caught fish for the Rosh Hashanah. The Maharal himself once made the same mistake his wife, the Rebbetzin, had made in using the golem to bring water for Passover. The rabbi used him to catch fish for Rosh Hashanah, an incident that also ended in laughter. Several years later, because of a great storm and freezing weather, there was a lack of fish in Prague for Rosh Hashanah. The morning of the eve of the festival had already arrived, and there was not a fish to be had in the city. This caused the Maharal such great distress, he gave himself dispensation to use the golem to send him to catch fish for Rosh Hashanah. A task like this, he declared, is considered a mitzvah. The Maharal, confident that the golem would catch fish even during a windstorm, provided him with a net and told him to go to the river and catch fish. Since the rabbi's wife had neither a small basket nor a small bag for the golem to store his catch, she quickly gave him a big wheat sack. Yosel the golem took the net and the sack and ran off to the river despite the windstorm and icy cold. Just then someone brought a gift to the Maharal, a fish, not large but medium-sized, from the village near Prague, which pleased the rabbi greatly. Because of this, return home without them. Reb Avron Chaim, the Shemesh, went to the river and saw the golem standing in the water holding the fishy net. While waiting on the riverbank, he told the golem from afar, the Maharal wants you to return home at once. The golem then lifted the big sack lying next to him containing fish and showed it to the Shemesh. He indicated that it was not full yet. In fact, it was far from being full. So how could he return home if the sack wasn't full of fish? The volume of the sack was the equivalent of 10 bushels of grain. Reb Avron Chaim realized that 1/3 of the sack had yet to be filled. So he shouted to the golem and told him the Maharal said he'll do without the fish, but come back to him at once. Hearing these words, the golem quickly grabbed the sack and shook out all the fish he had caught, sending them back to the water. Then he threw the net and the empty sack over his shoulder and ran back to the Maharal. Later, Reb Avron Chaim too returned to the Maharal's house and reported everything the golem had done. At this, there was much laughter in the house. Then the Maharal whispered in her ears, "Now I see that the golem is fit to save the Jews from various troubles and calamities, but not to help them observe mitzvahs." 11. For what purposes the Maharal used the golem? The Maharal used the golem only to save the Jews from distress, and through him he performed many wondrous and miraculous deeds. Most of all, Rabbi Lo used the golem to fight against the blood libel, which was quite widespread during his time, and from which false accusation the residents of Prague and its environs suffered a great many calamities. Whenever the Maharal had to send the golem to a place of great danger, where it was not safe for him to be seen by anyone, he placed an amulet written on deerskin upon the golem, which made him invisible. Every year between Purim and the intermediary days of Passover, the golem was disguised in Gentile garb each evening. No one could tell who he was, for he looked like a Christian porter and was girded with a rope belt just like the other porters. The Maharal ordered the golem to spend the night walking the streets of the city, especially those of the Jewish quarter. If he saw anyone carrying something on his shoulder or transporting some bundle in a wagon, he was to rush toward that man and inspect him and his load. If the golem saw that the object was a corpse of a boy who would be cast into one of the Jewish houses, he was to seize that man along with his burden, bind them with his rope belt, and drag them off forcibly to the town hall, where sat the police chief, officers, and other city guards in order to have that man arrested and brought to judgment. The Maharal's first miracle with the golem. In Prague lived a very wealthy communal leader known as the Primus, named Reb Mordecai Meisel, to whom a Gentile butcher owed 5,000 kroner. Reb Mordecai, a moneylender by profession, emphatically demanded a repayment of the loan, but since this butcher either did not want to repay his debt or was unable to, he came up with a wily stratagem. He would accuse Reb Mordecai of blood libel, for which the latter would be imprisoned, whereupon the butcher would cease being hounded to pay his debt. That same night, the gentle butcher placed the pig into his cart and made his way to the city through the Jewish quarter. He stopped near Reb Mordecai Meisel's house in order to cast the dead child into his cellar and thereby initiate a blood libel. Now Yosel the golem saw the cart from afar and ran up to it. As he searched it carefully, his hands touched the pig and felt what was put into it. Yosel the golem then took his rope belt and forcibly began tying the butcher to the cart. But this butcher, no weakling, either began struggling with the golem, fighting to prevent the golem from tying him to the cart. However, the golem's strength overpowered him, and amid fierce blows, he wounded the butcher in several places. Finally, the Gentile butcher submitted to the golem, whose strength was supernatural. The golem then sat on the cart and quickly rode into the city's town hall to the office of the police chief. The golem's cart, entering quickly and noisily, created a great tumult among the policemen gathered in the town hall courtyard. A large group immediately surrounded the cart, wherein the Gentile butcher, bleeding from his wounds, was screaming in pain from the golem's unsparing blows. The policemen untied the Gentile butcher and pulled the injured man from the cart. Some ran to fetch a doctor to bandage his wounds, while others rushed to bring candles for light. Meanwhile, the golem fled from the scene, and no one pursued him. When the policemen kindled the lights, they searched the cart and found the pig. In its stomach, they noticed the dead child with an apparently slit throat wrapped in the prayer shawl of the Jews. The police understood at once the matter before them and immediately began to intensively question the Gentile butcher. At first, he denied everything, but since his deceit was so obvious, he was forced to admit that he had not murdered the child but stolen him from the Christian cemetery in order to perpetrate a blood libel against Reb Mordecai Meisel, who was pursuing him relentlessly to repay the money due him. The police inquired, "Who brought you here forcibly and who beat you and wounded you?" Increasing, oh, wait. A mute Christian porter suddenly ran toward me, the butcher replied. By the look on his face and his great strength, he was a demon, not a man. He beat me and wounded me badly because I wouldn't let myself be tied up with his rope. The Christian butcher was placed under arrest in the prison and brought to judgment. The following morning, this strange incident became known all over the city. But no one knew or understood the source of this great salvation. This incident struck terror into the hearts of the Jew haters. Only the priest Thaddeus realized that no one but the Maharal could have done this with the help of a supernatural power. Therefore, the priest spread the word in the city that the Maharal was a sorcerer. His hatred of the Maharal increased greatly, and he constantly thought of plots and schemes to contend with the Maharal and all the Jews of Prague. The astonishing tale of the healer's daughter. In Prague, there was a Jewish healer named Maritzi, who, although estranged from Judaism, was still considered a Jew. He had a 15-year-old daughter who strayed from the straight and narrow path and was lured to convert out of her faith and become Christian. One night during the intermediary days of Passover, she ran away from her father's house to the infamous priest Thaddeus, who had a reputation as a virulent anti-Semite. He ceasingly planned stratagems to spread a net at the feet of Jewish girls who would then fall into his trap and convert. This incident was connected to another one that occurred in Prague. A Christian woman from a village near Prague had been a housemaid in the city for several years. During the winter, she was one of those who would kindle the Jews' ovens on Sabbath. Since she was always going in and out of their houses, she was well known in the Jewish community. So it so happened that after Purim, a quarrel broke out between the maid and the family she served, whereupon she suddenly fled from her employer's house at night. No one knew where she had gone, assuming the maid had surely run off to her native village. The family was not overly concerned about her departure and told no one about it, but no one knew exactly where she lived. When the priest Thaddeus was informed that a Christian maid had disappeared in Prague, he decided to use this incident as a pretext for initiating a blood libel against the Jews of the city. And since he always secretly inquired and probed about doing things in the Maharal's house, he learned that the rabbi had gotten himself a mute servant whom he would use as a guard to guard the Jewish quarter against the blood libel. Therefore, the priest fabricated the accusation in a way that the Maharal's Shemoshim would be caught, and perhaps even the Maharal himself would be implicated. It was at this time that the healer's daughter fell into the priest's hand and was prepared to convert. She lived at his place, locked in a secret room in the courtyard of his cloister. Then the priest enticed her with the following words: "On the day the cardinal makes you a Christian, he will ask you why you are converting and what prompted you to do this. For it is customary to ask such a question. Your reply should be, I am doing this because I can't stand the cruel customs of the Jews who, according to their belief, slaughter a Christian every year and use his blood to mix it into the matzahs they bake for Passover." False accusations know no bounds, eh? The priest also coached her to tell the cardinal that a few days before Passover, she herself had seen the city's rabbi, two Shemoshim, coming to her father's house one night. Tell the cardinal that one was an old man of short stature, the other was a young man of average height with a black beard who could not speak but only gesture with his fingers, as do deaf mutes. They told your father that the city rabbi had sent him a flask of blood for Passover. For your father paid a lot of money for this blood, which was mixed into the dough of the matzahs, and that is why you became terribly disgusted with eating matzahs and with the entire faith of the Jews and decided to convert to Christianity. The priest also taught her to say that, according to rumor, it was learned that the Christian maid who had disappeared had fallen victim to the Jews who had slaughtered her and taken her blood to distribute it amongst the Jews before the recent Passover holiday. The day arrived when the healer's daughter met with the cardinal, and it came to pass just as the priest Thaddeus had thought. The cardinal asked her the customary questions, and she replied, craftily, just as the priest had instructed. She also asked the cardinal, "Do not implicate my father in this accusation, for he had nothing to do with this matter and would not want to be a witness in this case. You see, all the Jews of Prague are afraid of the rabbi of the city, who he is considered a holy man by them and whose command they obey meticulously." The remarks of the healer's daughter, who had converted, spread quickly through the town like an arrow out of the bow of a great fear fell upon the Jews. On account of this, the cardinal was obliged to submit a protocol to the court, even though he knew in his heart that this was just a false accusation. In any case, he could not hide this matter from the priest Thaddeus, who urged him to rush the protocol to the court. After the protocol was prepared, the cardinal sent the Maharal a copy of its contents so he could devise a plan for the truth to surface. The malicious contents of the protocol showed that the priest Thaddeus had written it. The document declared that the apostate girl who had testified to the cardinal that the Jews of Prague had mixed Christian blood into their matzahs this past Passover, that from the rumor in the town that she had learned that this blood was from the Gentile maid who had disappeared several weeks before Passover, that this blood had been distributed among the Jews by the Maharal's two Shamoshim, who took a lot of money for it, and that the Maharal's hands too were no doubt besmirched by the blood of this innocent soul. When the Maharal found out that this protocol had been sent to the court, he realized the first thing the court would do is order the two Shemoshim seized from their beds at night and jailed, as was always the custom. Therefore, the Maharal decided upon the following course of action. He knew that this apostate girl was not familiar with Yudl, the Golem's face, and since the Prague poor never lacked raggle-tatted, blind, deaf, mute, and lame people, he sent one of his resolute men to choose one deaf mute from among the poor who somewhat resembled Yudl, the Golem, in height and age, and bring him to the Maharal. The Maharal's wishes were fulfilled. When a deaf mute who knew absolutely nothing of the events in town nor of the news on everyone's lips was brought before the Maharal, the rabbi asked, "I want the Golem hidden in a different house and have him stripped of his usual weekday garb and dressed in other clothing, and then I want the Golem's clothing brought to me." Then the Maharal added, "And now prepare a fine supper with brandy for the deaf mute and lie him down in Yudl, the Golem's bed, in the room of the rabbinic court." The deaf mute was astounded by the honor accorded him and enjoyed immensely the fine food and brandy that had been served, the like of which he had perhaps never tasted in his life. Then he lay down and slept. "Take the deaf mute's clothing away," the Maharal instructed, "and replace it with Yudl, the Golem's clothing, which everyone recognizes as the garb of the shemesh of the rabbinic court." In the middle of the night, the police surrounded the house of the old shemesh, Reb Avron Chaim. They entered his living quarters, took from his bed, arrested him, and brought him into the prison. At the same time, the other police surrounded the courtroom where the Golem slept. Some of them entered and, assuming that the mute second shemesh lay on the bed, began to rouse him from his sleep. After much effort, they finally succeeded in waking the mute stranger, who was deep in a sweet and contented sleep. When the deaf mute woke, he saw the policemen standing before him, holding spears and swords. He was terror-stricken and did not know what they wanted from him, but the police signaled to him to put on the clothing beside him. Frightened and confused, he did not realize the clothes were not his. He dressed, and then he too was taken to the prison. Morning came, and Prague was in turmoil because of the terrible news concerning the accusation against the Maharal's two Shemoshim. Everyone was afraid that the Maharal himself might be caught in this evil trap. God forbid. No one knew what to do. The only help they could offer was cries and groans and recitation of psalms. The trial was set for 1 month hence, and the Maharal too was invited by the court to attend, according to King Rudolph's edict. But although the Maharal was neither tranquil nor composed, he did his best to be helpful in this matter. First, he ordered learned and zealous men to thoroughly investigate the home where the Christian maid had worked, to discover where she was born and where her family lived, in order to know where to look for her, for she surely had fled her to her hometown. They also probed assiduously the reason for her flight. In other words, they did their own investigation. The inquiry suggested that the search for the girl focused on 4 places, 2 villages and 2 small towns only several kilometers from Prague. Maharal took 8 men and sent them secretly in groups of 2 to these 4 places where they were to stroll about furtively and look for the runaway Christian maid. 12 days passed when all 8 messengers returned empty-handed. The Maharal was overcome with much anguish and grief. 3 days later, the Maharal summoned Yudl the Golem at night and asked him, "Do you know the Christian maid who used to light the ovens in the Jewish houses on Sabbath?" Then he added, "Because of the girl's disappearance from the city, a blood libel accusation has suddenly been leveled against the Jews." Yudl the Golem signaled that he knew the girl well and would even be able to recognize her among 1,000 people. Thereupon, the Maharal wrote a letter to her in the local language in the name of the master of the house where the maiden had been employed, requesting her to return to him. The letter stated that he regretted the sin he had committed against her and the wrong she suffered of late in the house. After asking for forgiveness, he begged and cajoled her to come back at once, and she would lack for nothing at his house. For this reason, he is sending her a special messenger, this mute, a member of his family, along with money for travel expenses and for hiring a special wagon to return immediately to Prague. Adding flattering remarks, and further urged her not to deny his request and plea, but rather hire a special wagon at once and return with the messenger to Prague. In the letter, the Maharal also sent sufficient money to enable her to have more than enough for traveling expenses. Then the Maharal gave Yudl the Golem the letter with the money. "This maid is surely in one of these 4 places," he told him. "Be quick and very persistent in your search for her," was the Maharal's strict order. "Walk around for several days in each town and look for her diligently until you find her. And when you do, give her this letter and the money and make sure you bring her back to Prague. In other words, don't leave her until she returns to Prague with you. And you must accomplish this mission during the 2 weeks before the trial begins." The Maharal then dressed the Golem in Gentile garb and gave him food for the journey. Before dawn, the Golem was already on his way. The 2 weeks passed quickly. The day of the trial was near. Since Yudl the Golem had not yet returned, the heartbroken Maharal decreed a day of fasting for all of Prague on the day before the trial. He also issued a proclamation for all the Jews to assemble at dawn in the synagogues and prayer houses on the day before the trial to recite the complete book of Psalms with wails and weeping. In the great synagogue, the Maharal himself went up to the prayer stand to recite psalms, and the entire congregation wept with him. On the morning of the trial, the masses, most of them Christians, started gathering in front of the tall building made of hewn stones and dedicated to great tribunals. Shalom, Imam Pamuji. Then the judges began arriving at the courthouse. The priest Thaddeus and his healer's apostate daughter came in a covered wagon. Then the 2 Shemoshim, bound in chains and surrounded by many guards, were brought to the courthouse. The Maharal, accompanied by the head of the Jewish community, Reb Mordecai Meisel, arrived in a beautiful chariot. The presiding judge rang the gold bell before him to signal the start of the trial. First, he turned to the old Shemesh, Reb Avron Chaim. "Do you admit your guilt in distributing Christian blood among the Jews before Passover so they can mix it into their matzahs?" the judge asked. "I haven't got the faintest idea about any of this," the old Shemesh replied. Then the presiding judge took small flasks filled with a red liquid and asked the deaf mute with gestures if he had carried such flasks. The mute, assuming that those flasks surely contained red brandy and that the judge wanted to offer him a glass, nodded to indicate yes, yes. Joy and desire suffused his face as he put his finger to his mouth. Then a roar broke out in the courtroom, for the priest Thaddeus had risen and addressed the judges. "This mute is an honest witness. He's indicating yes to signify that it's true that he had in his hands flasks of this sort filled with blood. That's why he put his finger in his mouth, to show that it was this blood that the Jews had consumed." The anti-Semites present agreed with the priest, but many in the courtroom laughed at this and declared that the deaf mute's gesture of yes indicated that he would willingly drink a glass of red brandy. After this, the lawyer brought in by the defendants took a knife and, as the deaf mute watched, passed it across his throat to indicate slaughter. As he pointed out to the Maharal and to the small flasks, asked by signs if he knew something of this matter. The deaf-mute grew pale and shook his head to signify no. At this point, the priest Thaddeus said, "The deaf-mute assumed you were asking him if he wanted to be slaughtered, if he wanted to slaughter the rabbi, and that's why he said no." When the defense counsel began to argue with the priest, the presiding judge rang the gold bell to silence the contenders. He then summoned the apostate girl to testify. "Don't be afraid of telling everything you know pertaining to this trial." In a smooth-tongued manner, point by point, as recorded in the protocol and reflecting her testimony before our ovens on the Sabbath. Hold on, did I miss a page? Before the cardinals, she told the judges, "These two shemashim brought the blood-filled flasks to my father by order of the rabbi. My father paid handsomely for this and put the money into the hands of this old shemesh. The flask of blood was held by the second deaf shemesh, from whose hand I myself took the flask to hide it, according to my father's wishes." "How do you know that the Christian maid who disappeared is the victim whose blood this is?" the presiding judge asked. "Because before the Shemoshim left my father's house," she replied, "this old Shemesh took my father's hand as a mark of departure and said the following: 'Don't worry, Mr. Maritzi. When the cold of winter arrives, the one above will find us another victim to light our ovens on the Sabbath.'" Now the defense counsel approached the apostate girl. "Do you know well the faces of the two Shemoshim who visited your father, and are you absolutely sure they were the ones who now stand before you?" "Of course it is they, the apostate girl answered with a laugh. "I would recognize them in the dark." When the defense counsel saw she was impudently sticking to her story, he requested the judges send for her father and bring him to the court to enable us to cross-examine him to see if his testimony coincides with his daughter's. Boy, this sounds like an episode of Bull. I don't know if you've ever seen the show, some of these courtroom dramas. But the presiding judge answered. Even before the onset of the trial, a letter was sent to the father summoning him to testify as a witness. However, 2 weeks have passed, and we have learned that the father has moved out of Prague altogether to an unknown place. Hence, it will not be possible to delay the trial over this. Hello, Patricia. Nice to have you with us. When the presiding judge had completed his remarks, the sounds of tumult and noise of a shouting crowd were suddenly heard outside the windows of the courthouse. The people within grew alarmed and ran to the windows. "What's going on?" they asked. "What's happening out there?" They became aware at once that marvelous events were taking place outside. This is what happened. The real Yosel, the Golem, had suddenly appeared, driving his wagon in great haste and dispatch into the crowd in front of the courthouse. In the wagon sat the very same Christian maid who had suddenly disappeared from her master's house and whom Yosel the Golem had found in the village where she lived with her family. The letter with the money he had given her had worked to persuade her to return with him to Prague. When the wagon had passed through the street where the Maharal lived, the Golem stopped and jumped from the wagon to inform the rabbi that he had found the maid. He also wanted to change clothes. He removed the garb of the Gentiles he was wearing and put on his Sabbath clothes, for his weekday clothing was now being worn by the deaf-mute stranger who was then in the courtroom. Outside, the judges ordered the newcomers into the courtroom. As soon as the Golem saw the Maharal sitting there, he jumped toward him by means of odd gestures, which prompted a roar of laughter to break out in the courtroom. He indicated to the Maharal that he had found the missing maid and would show her to him. But the priest Thaddeus and the apostate girl were terrified at hearing that the Christian maid had been found, the one they accused of being slaughtered for the blood libel. The apostate girl fainted and fell to the ground, causing an even greater uproar in the courtroom until they finally brought her to. The presiding judge then rang his golden bell for silence and order. He called the Maharal and sat him down in a chair beside him. "Please tell us," the judge said, "who is this second mute man who brought the lost housemaid, and where was she found?" The Maharal then told the judges all about his laborious efforts from beginning to end to reveal the truth. Everyone can see that this is a false accusation concocted by the healer's daughter, who is a traitor to her people and to her faith. I was helped by heaven to come up with clever ideas and good plans to save the lives of the poor people, innocent of all harmful intent from unwarranted punishment. The The Maharal's wisdom astounded the judges, and his remarks amazed them. They immediately sent for the master of the house, for whom the missing Christian maid had worked. When he entered the courtroom, he recognized her at once. The maid said she had run away because of the slanderous remarks that were being said about her. She also displayed the letter on whose account she had returned to Prague with the mute messenger. At this point, the presiding judge could no longer contain himself. He kissed the Maharal on the forehead and shook his hand lovingly. We thank you for your efforts, your labor, and your wisdom, which has saved us from rendering a guilty verdict against innocent men. The accused were immediately freed in their stead. The apostate girl was sentenced to 6 years in prison for perjury. The priest Thaddeus returned home humiliated and very furious, just as it is written about Haman, his head covered in mourning, while the Maharal returned home happy and highly esteemed, and the entire city of Prague, too, rang with joyous cries. Chapter 14, the wondrous and famous story known as the daughter's misfortune. In Prague lived an immensely wealthy and honored wine merchant named Reb Mikliberger. Only in his cellar were the choicest wines available, and only from him did all the priests and army officers purchase their wine. This merchant had a beautiful and intelligent 16-year-old daughter who managed the wine shop and supervised the sale of wine, for she was fluent in several languages and could deal with all kinds of people. Even the priest Thaddeus, infamous as a vicious anti-Semite, always bought his wine there, but he cast his evil eye on this only daughter who always sat in the shop. His plan was to ensnare her and lure her to his house, where he could entice her to convert to Christianity. So adept was he in this sort of endeavor that a number of Jewish girls had fallen into his net in this fashion. But with this Jewish girl, he had no links or familiarity to enable him to drag her into his net. For she was truly a modest maiden of excellent virtue. Moreover, her parents were honorable, God-fearing people of distinguished lineage who watched over their only daughter, like the apple of their eye. She wasn't even permitted to stroll outdoors on Sabbaths and holidays. The priest hit upon the following ruse. He began buying wine on credit. This only daughter was in charge of the account books and recorded all the bills. After a while, she sent her servants to the priest with the bill that showed his debt. The priest paid in full, but his scheme was to create a dispute over the bill that would oblige the only daughter to come to his house with the account books to show him the error. And he succeeded in this stratagem, for the servants came several times with the bill, and he paid it in proper fashion. A few months later, when the servant was sent with the bill, the priest told him, according to my accounts book, this bill is wrong. You just want to take money unwarrantedly for 10 more bottles of wine than is due you. It's not me who wrote the bill, the servant apologized, but the winery's owner's daughter. Then it is she who made the mistake in the bill. The priest replied, and when she comes here with her account books, I'll show her the mistake. The servant returned home with the bill and told the only daughter what the priest had said. Not suspecting anything amiss, she took the servant and the accounts book, and both of them went to the priest. When they arrived, the priest told the only daughter, your servant is demanding payment for 10 additional bottles of wine, but I'm asking you to give me an honest accounting and to tell me how much I owe you according to your accounts book. She acceded, but the second bill was still exactly like the first. The priest marveled at this, and in so doing pretended to recall something he had forgotten. I just remembered the bill is correct, he called out, but I'm right too, because some weeks ago 10 bottles of wine were delivered to me that tasted just like vinegar, and I didn't want to accept them. That's why they weren't written down in my accounts book. This astonished the wine merchant's only daughter greatly, for she knew she always sent the priest the choicest wines. The priest then ordered his servant to go to the cellar and bring up the 10 wine bottles that had been set aside in a special place in a separate basket. When the wine was brought up, the priest then told the only daughter, I opened up only this one bottle that isn't full, And if you don't believe me, open another bottle and taste from it, and you'll see it's vinegar, not wine." She agreed to this. She took a bottle from the basket and ordered her servant to open it and pour a glass for her to taste. Now, the priest had previously done something to ensure that all that wine would definitely be considered wine of libation. The only daughter ever even imagined it was forbidden to drink this wine, even if it were just plain wine that now belonged to the Christian. When she tasted the wine, she saw there was nothing wrong with it, and she finished the entire glass. "But this wine is perfectly good," she told the priest with a laugh. "What's your complaint about this wine?" The priest feigned surprise. He also tasted the wine and declared it truly is a good wine, and he ordered another bottle open. The only daughter tasted first and noted that this wine too was good. Then the priest drank and said, "Now I see I was mistaken, and you're right." With this, the priest, amid flattering remarks, began to ask pardon of the only daughter whom he had wrongly suspected, and he took her hand in his and pressed it humbly and affectionately, even though she had never before given her hand to another man. Now she did not dare resist him, and the wine of libation she had drunk helped her along in this. "I have no ill feelings towards you," was her reply, "for all people are just flesh and blood and can make mistakes." The priest then paid her all the money due her according to her bill, and with each exchange of conversation spoke more fondly and amicably to her. As for the only daughter, drinking the non-kosher wine and shaking hands with the priest burned in her like a snake's venom, and feeling a change of heart, she began to enjoy the priest's remarks. She too engaged him in conversation and grew increasingly attached to him. When she left, she gave her hand to the priest of her own accord, and he parted from him with such affectionate words he felt could invite her to visit him occasionally. The priest's remarks were persuasive enough to corrupt her. From then on, she began sending him letters by means of his servant who came to purchase his wine. He too wrote her letters, and each time drew her closer and closer until finally she secretly began visiting the priest by herself. This continued for a while until one time the only daughter did not come home to sleep, but disappeared like a stone in water. A great commotion ensued, and loud cries were heard in her parents' house, for they had no other children besides this only daughter. The parents began to look for her and to probe and inquire of other people if they had seen her. Then a man informed them that he had seen her on the night she disappeared, walking through the narrow lane that leads to the priest Thaddeus' cloister. This awful news grieved them bitterly. They understood that she was in dire straits if she had fallen into this snare. They ran to the priest in tears. "Have pity on us," they cried out, "and return our daughter to us." But the priest dismissed their pleas with laughter and even vented his anger at them. "I haven't seen her," he said, "and know nothing about her." Her parents returned home despondent with tears on their cheeks. Everyone who saw them felt their great tragedy in their hearts. The priest Thaddeus locked their only daughter in a secret place in the courtyard of his cloister, where it would be impossible for anyone to see her or talk to her through a window. He saw to it that she didn't lack for anything. He visited her daily to discuss the Christian religion that she would be accepting and began to teach her the Christian prayers. It finally dawned on the priest that the girl was sad and gloomy, being alone, and had weakened her nerves. He concluded, and the only medicine for her pains was to find a suitable groom for her who would visit her from time to time, talk to her, and befriend her. "Why are you so sad?" the priest asked her. He consoled her and said kindly, "You won't be alone much longer. I'm arranging to find you a good and worthy husband whom you'll soon see." Several kilometers from Prague dwelled an old and very rich duke who had an 18-year-old son, 18-year-old only son, good-looking, intelligent, and very learned. The priest Thaddeus was a dear and beloved friend of the duke and was considered a member of the family. He came up with the idea of marrying the duke's only son to the Jewish only daughter who lived with him in virtual imprisonment. The priest visited the duke and mentioned his idea. He praised the only daughter exceedingly and told him her history. For them, it was a great privilege to marry a Jewish girl who had converted to Christianity. The priest also persuaded the only son that it would be a feather in his cap if he would succeed in getting her hand in marriage. The Duke and his only son decided that after their customary Sunday visit to the Prague cloister, they would remain to have lunch with the priest. He would then introduce the girl, and if they liked her, there would be consent all around. On Sunday, the old Duke and his only son came to Prague, and the priest prepared a great feast for them. When the wine had made their hearts merry, the priest sent someone to bring the girl to them. She already knew what was happening, for the priest had already told her previously to adorn herself and make herself pretty as befitted the occasion, as today she would be called to present herself as a handsome intended groom. She did just that and appeared before them during the wine feast. Both the Duke and his son liked her very much. That day, the Duke and his son did not return home, but spent the night at the priest's residence to enable them to talk some more with the girl. The next day, the priest prepared another great feast. The girl was invited and sat joyfully next to the Duke's son throughout the entire meal, just like groom and bride. I don't know if any of you guys had a chance to notice, but we showed this weekend Rabbi Goldberg's son's wedding live from Jerusalem, so you could see a traditional Jewish wedding. But this is heinous, this story. At the end of the banquet, each gave a hand to the other as a sign that the match was settled. They decided the wedding would take place 2 months later, on the very day just after the cardinal would officiate at her conversion to Christianity. The Duke's son gave his fiancée a gold ring containing a beautiful precious stone engraved with 2 letters, the initials of his name. They departed from each other with due deference, and the Duke and his son returned home. But during all this time, the girl's parents neither rested nor relaxed. With all their might, they attempted to save their daughter from the clutches of the priest Thaddeus. However, all their labor was in vain. When her parents realized there was neither rescuer nor deliverer in their city, they decided to go to their kinsman, the great Gaon, Rabbi Yaakov Ginsburg of the Holy Community of Friedberg, to save them from their woe, for the matter impinged upon him too. But in your own city, was the Gaon's reply, you have the head of the rabbinic court, the saintly Gaon, the great rabbi, the Maharal. So why did you come to me? He can help you more than I. Thereupon, the Gaon, Rabbi Yaakov Ginsburg, wrote a letter to the Maharal. I earnestly request you to involve yourself in this matter and attempt with all your might to save the daughter of these unfortunate parents from the snare into which she has fallen, because this matter touches upon you also, for you are their kinsman and rescuer. When the parents arrived at the Maharal's house, they immediately gave him the letter. They pleaded with him tearfully to save them from their great misfortune. The Maharal was terribly distressed by this letter, and knowing that the priest Thaddeus was a vicious anti-Semite and a vengeful and vindictive snake in the grass, he had no desire to enter into battle with him, but because of the great bond of friendship between them, the words of the great Gaon, our master, Rabbi Yaakov Ginsburg, encouraged him. The Maharal then decided to offer his assistance, but in order to prevent the priest from learning of his involvement in this matter, he met secretly with his fellow townsmen. That is why the Maharal loudly proclaimed to everyone who had gathered in his house, I have no idea how to help these people and no desire to intervene. At night, however, the Maharal quietly sent the old Shemesh, Reb Avron Chaim, to summon the girl's distraught parents. Upon their arrival, the Maharal told them, I'm going to enter into this affair and find a solution for you, but in such a way that no one will suspect that I have had a hand in this matter. First, I want you to immediately prepare for tomorrow in a hidden place in your yard, a covered wagon hitched to good horses, and a good driver who is faithful and discreet. I also want you to get 2 other strong and brave men, friends whom you like and trust, who will be ready and willing to run off with the girl as soon as she comes home. The Maharal also asked the parents, do you know of a safe place in another country to which you could flee with her and where she could stay peaceably and be cared for properly? I have a very rich brother in Amsterdam named Reb Chaim Berger, the girl's father said, and that will be a good place for her. He's a pious man, a Torah scholar, and he also owns the city's largest wine business. This pleased the Maharal, and he agreed that Amsterdam would be suitable. I want you both to fast for 3 days in a row, starting tomorrow morning, the rabbi told the parents, and eat only at night. And on each of these 3 days, you will recite the entire book of Psalms amid weeping. The Maharal sent them home, stressing absolute secrecy about their visit to his house that evening and his involvement in the matter. The unfortunate parents returned home, their hearts full of hope, and meticulously followed each of the Maharal's commands. During these last 3 days, in which the girl's parents fasted with prayers, laments, and tears, the girl in her room began to long very much for her parents. She imagined how they must be wailing for her and what wonderful parents they were to her, and now she had betrayed them and cast them behind her back to follow strangers. Unable to restrain herself, she cried all through the night, for she saw there was no escape for her soul from the trap into which she had fallen. The next morning, when the priest came to her, he saw her distress and noticed her red eyes. "What happened to you?" he asked. "I'm feeling a bit ill," she replied, "but no matter, my indisposition will soon pass." At that time, the Cardinal of Krakow happened to summon all the priests under his jurisdiction to a large conference. Amazingly, the priest Thaddeus also attended, even though the cardinal was not his superior. Before leaving for Krakow, the priest gave a strict warning to his servant not to let any stranger either enter the cloister courtyard. When the Maharal learned that the priest Thaddeus had gone to the priest's conference in Krakow, he secretly summoned Yudl the Golem. "A Jewish girl has fallen into the hands of the priest Thaddeus," he told him, "and she is surely in one of the secret rooms in the cloister courtyard. Therefore, I'm now ordering you to rescue the girl from there tomorrow night and bring her to the house of her father, Reb Mikli Berger." That is why the Maharal adorned the golem with the well-known amulet that made him invisible. The Maharal also gave him a short letter that read, "I, your grandfather, have come from heaven to rescue you from this place. Hide in this sack, and I will bring you to your parents." The Maharal gave the golem a big sack and commanded him, "As soon as dawn breaks, go to the cloister courtyard and stand next to the small iron door, for through it people enter and leave the courtyard. The door has the sort of lock that can also be opened from the inside even without a key. A stranger, however, will not know how to open it from the inside without a key unless he sees how it is done. Therefore, I want you to stand at that spot from early in the morning and wait until someone leaves. At that moment, you will be able to enter without anyone seeing you, for the amulet has made you invisible. Once you succeed in entering," the Maharal also told the golem, "walk about the courtyard all day to learn well how to open the door from the inside without a key. Also, look everywhere diligently until you find the girl's room. Enter quietly and hide there until midnight. Once you sense that all the men in the courtyard are already asleep and the girl is asleep, wake her and show her the sack and the letter. After she reads the letter, open the sack in her presence for her to enter it. Then take her on your shoulder, leave with her through the small iron door, and bring her to her father and mother's house. Then come back to sleep in my house." The Maharal instructed him in all these details and warned him several times about each and every one until he saw that the golem had understood everything and was prepared to carry out all the orders. Yudl the golem took everything needed quickly early in the morning and went to the cloister, where he successfully accomplished all the Maharal had commanded him to do. 2 hours past midnight, Yudl the golem brought the girl to her father's house in the sack. Who can describe and depict the tears of joy in the house when the unfortunate parents suddenly saw their only daughter standing before them? She fell to the ground at their feet and kissed them. Tears streamed down from her eyelids as she begged their forgiveness for the despicable deed she had done. Her father and mother fell on her neck and covered every part of her with kisses. But when they asked her, "Who brought you here? Who was your rescuer and savior? Where is he?" she had no answer for them. She only showed them the letter the golem had given her. "My grandfather from the supernal world came to me at night," she said, "and put me in a big sack, then fled with me and brought me here." The father and mother believed this and thought that the Maharal had summoned him from the upper realm to come and save his granddaughter. But then the father remembered the Maharal's warning to flee with her at once to another country. Now is not the time to divert ourselves with our daughter, he told his wife, nor to talk at length with her. Kiss her as much as you can, for we now have to run away with her to my brother in Amsterdam. All the preparations were soon made for this long journey. Reb Mikli Berger, his daughter, and two capable friends climbed into the waiting covered wagon in the courtyard, and they departed. In the morning, a great tumult was heard in the house of the priest's servant when they learned that the Jewish girl had fled. The servant was terror-stricken that the priest would hold him responsible for the girl's escape. We would never have known what ruse the servant came up with to avoid having the priest blame him for that occurrence. But from the story described after this one, we can gather that the servant came up with this idea. From the cloister cellar, he took the bones of a dead man and placed them on the bed on which the girl had lain. Then he set the room on fire, and before the firefighters could arrive, the entire room was ablaze. The firemen found the burned bones of a man. A protocol was then written stating that in a room of the cloister courtyard, a stranger who had come to consult the priest on a certain matter was found burned to death, and the priest's guest name was recorded in the protocol, as the priest later testified. And the next story after this one tells that the servant avenged himself on the priest and informed on him regarding this matter, that the priest inviged him, the only daughter of Reb Mikli Berger, and slyly enticed her to convert, forcibly locked her in a room, and tormented her until she lost the will to live, and set the room in which she was imprisoned on fire. When the priest Thaddeus came home from Krakow, saw the destruction, and heard the servant's remarks, he was overcome with horror, but he remained mute, for he could not prove that the servant had lied. And so he was obliged to stay silent. In his heart, however, he knew that the fire could only have been set by his servant in order to cover up the escape of the girl. He suspected his servant of having been paid off to set the girl free, and decided to get even with him, as will be seen in the next story. The priest related to the Duke exactly what his servant had told him during the meeting of the priests in Krakow. Something terrible had happened in the cloister courtyard. Some hours after midnight, a great fire broke out and spread to the room where the girl was sleeping, and before the firemen arrived, the room had become an inferno, and only her bones were found. When the Duke's only son heard the awful news that his fiancée, to whom he had been bound with bonds of love, had been burned alive, he was exceedingly agitated and downcast. His depression led to a nervous breakdown, for his vivid imaginations made him constantly see before him the tongues of fire surrounding the body of his beloved fiancée as she lay on her bed in sweet sleep, then suddenly woke from her pains and could no longer battle the bitterness of death. Recalling this, his compassion was stirred for her, and from that moment on, he had no peace of mind. He neither ate nor slept. He was like a stunned man. The old Duke understood his son's illness and sought advice how to ease his distress. He entertained him with a variety of pleasant diversions and asked matchmakers to seek a proper match for his son as befitted him, but nothing helped, no pleasure satisfied him, and no girl pleased him after experiencing the beauty, nobility of spirit, and fine character of the Jewish girl. Therefore, he decided that his only consolation would be to take a Jewish girl for a wife, as refined and beautiful as his first fiancée. But when the Duke's son realized how difficult it would be to find a Jewish girl with all the good attributes, for it wouldn't be easy to find one willing to convert out of Judaism and accept Christianity, and perhaps he wouldn't even like the one who would, he hit upon the idea of traveling to a far-off land where he would convert to Judaism without his father's knowledge, study Torah, and then marry a Jewish girl of his choice. For money was no obstacle, and in order to have sufficient money, he told his father his plan. There is only one medication for my illness. As long as I stay here, I won't be able to forget my fiancée who was burned to death. And if this continues much longer, I'll have no recourse but to be placed among madmen. And so here's my brilliant idea. I'll go to Venice to further my education and over several years get degrees from higher schools of learning. By concentrating all day on my studies in pursuit of higher education, I'll slowly and gradually forget my grief. Then I'll be able to return to your house, father, and seek another match. Although the old Duke loved his only son very much and found it difficult to part with him for such a long time, he had no choice but to accede to his son's desire, for he truly feared for his psyche, lest his great grief had him to madness. The Duke thought that perhaps studying would hopefully make his son forget his anguish. And so the Duke gave his son as much money as he requested and sent him off to Venice. There, the Duke's son rented a private room and presented himself as a merchant who travels from land to land in pursuit of his business interests. He signed a contract with the landlord from whom he rented the room and said, "It is very likely I'll use the room only several times a year, but I'll pay you an entire year's rent on condition that the room remains unoccupied and always ready for me. I have but one request of you. If letters come for me while I'm away, please take them out of the mailbox and put them into my room through the slot in the door." All this the Duke's son did in order to have an address for his father's letters and for him to reply to his father. During that period, the great and saintly Gaon, Rabbi Yaakov Ginsburg of blessed memory of the holy community of Friedberg, was already world famous. In his day, he was considered second only to the Maharal, for he too was a great scholar, well versed in all sciences and various languages. He was also the teacher of the man who wrote the Tophos Yom Tov. Therefore, the Duke's son made up his mind to travel to Gaon Ginsburg, who would convert him and teach him Torah. Upon his arrival, the Gaon took a great liking to him. Before long, he converted the Duke's son and gave him the Hebrew first name Avraham and Yeshurun as a family name. The Gaon Ginsburg himself studied Torah with the converted Avram Yeshurun, and since he was widely learned and had a good mind, he quickly absorbed everything the Gaon taught him. But because this Gaon was very busy as rabbi and chief judge and heard of the yeshiva in the holy community of Friedberg, he could not continue to teach the convert any longer. He sent him to the great yeshiva that flourished at the time in Amsterdam and gave him a letter of recommendation stating that he was a good, decent, and sharp-witted fellow and a kinsman as well. Therefore, the Gaon requested in his letter that the head of the yeshiva give him lots of heartfelt warmth and watch over him diligently. Avraham Yeshurun parted tearfully from the Gaon, our master Rabbi Yaakov Ginsburg, who said, "I bless you with great success and also promise that in Amsterdam a match worthy of you will be sent to you from heaven." The Gaon gave him this sign: "When a match is offered to you and you are informed that the bride of a distinguished lineage and of a family of the Gaon Ginsburg, I want you to know that this is the right match for you and that the bride is your destined intended. I also advised you," the Gaon continued, "to keep the fact that you're a convert absolutely secret. Just say that you're from Bucharest and that your name is Avraham from the Yeshurun family and that you're a kinsman of the Gaon, our master, Rabbi Yaakov Ginsburg from Friedberg, which fact can readily be verified with the rabbi of the holy community of Friedberg." Avram Yeshurun traveled to Amsterdam and came to the Gaon, the head of the yeshiva, and introduced himself. He also showed him the letter of the Gaon of the holy community of Friedberg. The Gaon immediately welcomed him with heartfelt warmth and began to teach with Torah, which Avraham Yeshurun studied with great diligence and acumen. He achieved great fame as a Torah scholar and became known as the young genius of Bucharest. During this period, he kept traveling to Venice to collect the letters his father, the old Duke, had been sending him to reply to. However, much money was needed for a fine match because he was a man of great wealth and he was his only son. This news of the rich yeshiva student spread quickly throughout the city. The matchmakers began suggesting various matches to him, which he dismissed with flimsy excuses. Finally, one matchmaker suggested a match with a girl who was living at the wealthy Reb Heimberger's house. It was known in Amsterdam that she was an orphan of the daughter of Reb Heimberger's brother and that she was heir to a great fortune. And since she had no one to live with in her hometown, she sought shelter in the house of her uncle, who would be her pillar of support. Among her other attributes, according to the matchmaker, was her prestigious lineage and the entire city of Amsterdam regarding her birth, for she did not want it known whence she had been brought to this place, for she feared that the bad reputation she had in her hometown for seeking a convert would become known. In short, the match was arranged successfully and the engagement contract was signed amid great splendor, even though it seemed to the groom that the bride looked familiar. However, it did not dawn on him that she was his first fiancée, because her death in the fire in the courtyard of the priest's cloister had already been engraved in his mind. Some weeks after the engagement and before the wedding, the groom brought expensive gifts for his bride, including 2 gold rings set with precious stones. When the groom presented these gifts to the bride, she tried them on in his presence, but in order to place the rings on her fingers, she had to pull off the ring she was already wearing. When she placed her old ring on the table, the groom picked it up and recognized it at once as this ring had belonged to him. He had given the one he had given to his fiancée who had died in the fire. For besides the other signs the duke's son had noticed on the ring, he also saw the 2 letters engraved on the ring, the initials of his name. Wow! The pall of great fear came over the groom. His heart melted within him, and he fell to the ground in a faint. At once, the tumult ensued. Some people tended to him, woke him, and brought him to. Soon he felt well again, but he did not want to reveal the true reason for his fainting spell. He then scrutinized his bride very carefully and assiduously studied her voice and each of her gestures until he gradually came to realize more and more that his present bride was the very one whom he had been engaged with in Prague. He could no longer contain himself and adjured her softly, "Tell me truthfully, who are you and how you came to possess this ring? And don't have the slightest fear of telling me the truth," he added, "for no harm will befall you on this account." When the bride heard of these words from him, she too became very frightened and fell to the ground in a dead faint, unconscious. The groom cried out, shouting for help. People ran to him, tended to the girl, woke her, and brought her to as they had him earlier. But she could no longer hide the secret she harbored within her and was obliged to reveal to the groom all that had happened to her. And now the groom could no longer restrain himself, and in a voice full of tears began to speak to his bride. "I want you to know, my dear, that I am your first groom, the son of the Duke. But now I am a Jew, just like all other Jews, and divine providence has guided me over the paths of the seas to come to you and cling to you." Whoa, what a love story. Both of them shed bitter tears, and each consoled the other, and they rejoiced in newfound happiness and newfound love. Afterwards, the groom revealed the entire secret from beginning to end to the Gaon, the head of the yeshiva with whom he had studied. The entire matter also became known to the bride's uncle, Reb Heimberger, who expressed great joy, but they were absolutely delighted when they heard the blessing given to the groom by the Gaon, or Master Rabbi Yaakov Ginsburg of the Holy Community of Friedberg, who had told the groom that he would find his match in Amsterdam. And regarding this, the Gaon, the head of the yeshiva, remarked, "Now we can see with certainty that this is a match made in heaven." What the evil one sought to accomplish by forbidden means, divine providence has turned around to make it permissible. Now go and enjoy your acquisition. Hey, Daniel, how are you? Good to see you. Welcome. Soon thereafter, the wedding was celebrated in Amsterdam amid great splendor. During the same year, the old Duke died, and all his wealth, his estates, and all his villages were inherited by Avraham Yeshurun. He and his wife settled in the father's estate in a big castle located in a village several kilometers from Prague. When Avraham Yeshurun and his wife moved into his father's estate, the priest Thaddeus was no longer in Prague. The priest Thaddeus, for he had been exiled and sentenced to hard labor for being found guilty in the murder of his servant's son for the purpose of the blood accusation, as can be seen in the next story. Several days later, when the castle was captured, Avraham Yeshurun prepared a great banquet and invited his father-in-law, Reb Mikli Berger, and his wife and a few friends. He also invited the Maharal and sent an elegant and beautiful covered carriage for him. Until now, the mystery of who rescued the daughter of Reb Mikli Berger from the cloister courtyard had not been solved. But during the party, each person began telling of the events of this marvelous story, narrating a bit of what he had experienced. Then the Maharal said, "Because I was helped by heaven to get rid of my evil opponent, the ruthless priest Thaddeus, I am no longer afraid of revealing the truth to you. Now, know that it was not your grandfather from the world above who came to rescue the girl, but it was I who sent her a man carrying a big sack, and the little letter she got was written by me so that she would immediately obey and enter the sack." All the guests applauded and were very happy with the Maharal's remarks. They thanked the Creator for the wonders and miracles he had done for them. The Maharal was given precious gifts, among them the covered carriage with the horses that had been sent to bring him to the castle. In addition, the Maharal was presented with much money for good causes and to establish charities in Prague. Some years later, Reb Mikli Berger and his wife died, but Avram Yeshurun did not want to inherit his father-in-law's property. So he donated his house to the Bet Midrash, which is why it is called the Yeshurun Clois. Besides this, Reb Avram Yeshurun performed many other acts of kindness and distributed vast sums of monies to charities in Prague. He lived many years with his wife and achieved great success. Whoa, what a beautiful story of intrigue and mystery and suspense and love. Wow, just amazing. And you know what? I think I'm going to stop it there today because we're getting into another story in this wonderful, wonderful book. The Golem and the Wondrous Deeds of the Maharal of Prague. But I think that story really captured the essence of divine providence against evil forces. And when you really think about it, our own lives sometimes are wrought with mystery and intrigue and sometimes danger. And there are those wicked minds out there that try to throw stumbling stones and plant pitfalls and traps. But divine providence is able to guide you if you walk, like we read in our last book series, The Path of the Just. If you learn to walk with caution, enthusiasm, innocence, understand what good abstinence is as opposed to bad abstinence, understand what piety is, begin to acquire that purity, humility, fear of sin, and try to acquire what holiness really is at its depth. You work those in, divine providence comes into your life, over your life, and guides your steps. And there is no more greater joy than having the blessing of Almighty God, Hashem, over your life as you function through what appears to many as a troubled world. It brings clarity and peace, and more than that, fulfillment of life. And you can shine light in this world by what you do. And so hopefully you're encouraged by that. I know we have a lot more ladies that tune in than men. So hopefully you found that a very romantic story. I mean, I know yesterday was, quote, Valentine's Day. I brought my wife a dozen long stem red roses. She just loved them. And it's always nice when you can put a smile on somebody's face. But, we should strive to do that each and every moment, each and every day, and to make the world a better place. And, may Hashem's divine providence lead and guide you in all that you do out there. So hopefully you're enjoying this book. We're 46% in, nearly halfway done this book. I think I can maybe knock it off this week, Hashem willing, if I do broadcast tomorrow and Thursday. I think we can come close to knocking this off. And I got my eye on another book for next week as well, possibly. Let me just see what I'm thinking of for next week. Give you an example. I'm looking into maybe this book, the Vilna Gaon and his Messianic Vision, as a possibility. So, yeah, we might get a lot of depth out of that. It's a Kindle available, so I'm thinking I might go with that next week. This is if we can finish this week the Golem and the Wondrous Deeds of the Maharala of Prague. Remember, these are not factual stories, but are this is not the Golem was not as it says in the beginning of this is not an actual events. These are written stories, inspiration, and hopefully you see it as such. But it's always a joy to be with you folks, and it's nice to see regulars. Sheila Etzel, my mother, with us today, who's been sick, I understand, and we need to talk after this. Let's try and connect on the phone and have some chit chat. It's nice to see Ashley G, as always, in California. Great to have you with us. Patricia as well. Thank you for coming. And my friend Daniel from Bogota, Colombia down there. It's nice to see you with us, Daniel. Daniel's a singer, just a wonderful musician who, got lots of talent. And we look forward to seeing more music from him. He's inspirational. So, and our friend Karen Uri and Eliza, who's in the Far East. And Karen says she loves the story. It's getting better. And I've got people all over Facebook as well as those of you joining us on YouTube. But we're going to sign out now. So this is Rocky Mountain Readings for today. Join us tomorrow. We'll be back with more stories out of the Golem and the Wondrous Deeds of the Maharal of Prague. Till then, have a wonderful, wonderful day.